Level 0, Corner Kid. You are 16 and you don't know how to be quiet. 30 people on a Brownsville corner at 11 at night, and you're the reason they're standing there. You didn't plan it. You started rapping and the crowd just showed up, then doubled. That's what happens out here when someone is saying something real. There's a man at the back past where the bodega light reaches. He doesn't clap when you finish. Doesn't leave when the crowd breaks up. He just stands there with the patience of someone who came for a specific reason and already got what he needed. His name is MC Marcus. You find that out later. What he decided about you on that corner you don't find out until after it takes someone from you. Level 1, Freestyler. The first time you hear your own voice through studio monitors, you go still. Not because it sounds unfamiliar. Because it sounds like exactly what you meant, which is a feeling you have never had before in any room, on any corner, in any borough you have moved through. The studio is a converted bedroom in East Flatbush that charges $40 a session. The engineer keeps his chair angled toward the door because his back is already gone at 34. None of this is relevant except that it is the first room where what you make and what you intended are the same thing. That doesn't come from talent. It comes from the block years of learning how to read a room before a word is spoken, how to map the weight of a silence, how to understand what a man means when what he says and what he does don't match. It is the thing that will eventually save you. It is also the thing that will make saving you necessary. You have been performing on corners since you were 13, not for audiences, to prove that what you observe can be converted into something more durable than the environment that produced it. The attrition around you has faces and addresses 4 kids from your building process before 20, 2 funerals before your 16th birthday. You don't experience this as tragedy in the dramatic sense. You experience it as climate. It is the air the neighborhood breathes. What keeps your story from collapsing into that pattern is not luck. It is the notebook. At 15, a man named Calvin finds you on a corner 3 blocks from your building and listens for 6 minutes without a word. He is 41, semi-retired, one album that traveled far enough to matter and not far enough to protect him. He tells you to come back Thursday. You come back every Thursday for a year before he says the thing you still hear before every session. Say the thing you're actually afraid to say. Not the thing that sounds true. The thing that costs something to release. It takes 6 months before the gap closes between what you feel and what you put on tape. When it closes, the precision arrives. The ability to name what the block produces without making it smaller. The first tape runs 47 minutes, dubbed on a consumer deck, passed hand to hand across 3 boroughs in 5 weeks without $1 of distribution spend. Not because it is new, because it is accurate in a way that makes people feel the obligation to pass it forward. By 17, you are known in Brownsville, East New York, and parts of Crown Heights by people who have never seen your face. The reputation travels on the same thing that built it, specificity. You don't just name what the block feels like. You name what it runs on, who moves what, who built what, whose operation holds up the everyday noise that everyone agrees to walk past. The notebook does not distinguish between what is safe to document and what is not. Neither does the music. Calvin tells you this once, without elaboration, not as a warning and not as information, but as something that sits between them. He and Marcus go back, that there are things about that history he has never explained. He changes the subject in the middle of the sentence, the way people change subjects when they have already said more than they intended. You file it. You don't ask. The answer is the kind of information that changes what you're allowed not to know. You understand this without being able to say why. You find out why later. That is not a comfortable way to find out. Level 2, Battle Rapper. The track that names Marcus is not aimed at him specifically. It is the latest in a notebook's worth of material that documents the block's load-bearing structures, who runs what, where the money moves, what the quiet arrangements actually look like. You name Marcus the way you name everything. Because it is there and because your material does not distinguish between what is safe to say and what is not. That distinction matters to you. It does not matter to Marcus. It circulates on a Friday night in October, played at a party in Brownsville by a DJ who understands exactly what it means and plays it anyway. Not because he is reckless, because something true has arrived in his hands and he recognizes the weight of not playing it. The room goes quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when a line that cannot be uncrossed gets crossed. You are not present. You find out by midnight through 14 calls, arriving from people who don't normally call each other, from people with no reason to connect except that something just happened, that the information needs to move around. The track has named Marcus's block operation, his crew structure. 2 incidents from 1993 that the streets know and have never heard said at volume. The precision is the point. Anyone can gesture at a man's reputation. You describe the load-bearing architecture of what he built. Marcus responds within 48 hours. His countertrack is blunt where yours is surgical, loud where yours is cold. It doesn't need to be better. It needs to be heard in places yours hasn't reached yet. Marcus has a sound system infrastructure across 4 boroughs that you don't have, not because your material is weaker, because distribution and truth are different variables, and you are currently losing the distribution variable by a significant margin. The street verdict is simple. You won the exchange. He won the reach. You file this asymmetry. What you don't file correctly is the move Marcus makes 3 days after his counter drops. He doesn't come for you. He goes to Calvin. The conversation happens somewhere outside your radius. No witnesses, no record. Calvin doesn't mention it at Thursday's session. He runs the board. He marks the levels. He does his job with the particular attention of a man whose attention is somewhere else entirely. You notice. You don't ask. You run the calculation instead. Marcus bypassed you to reach the person who matters to you most. That is not the behavior of a man responding to a lyrical exchange. That is the behavior of a man who has already moved past the lyrical exchange to a different question, not what you are saying, but what would make you stop saying it. He found the answer on the first try. The session runs 2 hours instead of 4. Calvin says his back is worse than usual. His back has interrupted a session once in 4 years. You know this. You sit with it on the drive home. Then you sit with the question underneath it. What did Marcus say in that conversation, and what did Calvin agree to in order to end it? 3 days later, Calvin cancels Thursday. 9 words. No explanation. That is the question you carry into every session that follows. You never get to ask it. Level 3. Independent artist. The news arrives on a Tuesday evening while you are doing nothing in particular. Calvin was found at the bottom of a stairwell in his building. He is at Kings County Hospital. The police are calling it an accident. Calvin has navigated every stairwell in that building for 11 years. 1 sentence. No grief yet. Just the fact sitting in the place where you store information you are not ready to convert. You sit with it the way you sit with everything, recording it, storing it, letting the connections build. Marcus went to Calvin. Calvin stopped coming to Thursdays. And now Calvin is at the bottom of a stairwell that the police are calling an accident while everyone on the block is calling it something else. You don't need the police to tell you what happened. The pattern told you first. The session starts at 2 in the morning. You and a borrowed board in a studio 3 boroughs from where anyone would think to look, paid in cash, booked under a name that isn't yours. 5 hours without a break. The record that comes out is not a diss track. It is a document, the only response available to a man who has spent his entire life converting what he observes into something the observation can't take back. You go in with nothing written down. You come out with 4 songs and the feeling of a man who has said the thing he was afraid to say with full knowledge of what saying it costs. This record does not name the operation again. That record already exists. This one names the stairwell. It names Calvin, the 11 years, the Thursdays, the 1 album that traveled far enough to matter. It names the week between Marcus's conversation with Calvin and Calvin's fall. And it says, in the voice of someone who was there for all of it, what the connection is between those 2 events. The one person you trust enough to call arrives at 7 that morning, listens to the playback without moving, and sits for a long time after it ends. Then he says, this one is going to cost you something. You already know. You press it anyway. Within 72 hours, the record is in rotation across Brownsville, Bed-Stuy, and Crown Heights, not through infrastructure but through urgency. The momentum of something true that people feel they have no choice but to carry forward. By the end of the first week, 31,000 dubbed copies have traveled through the boroughs without a single dollar of distribution spend. Not because it is new, because it says what the neighborhood already knows, in the voice of someone who was close enough to Calvin to have earned the right to say it. Marcus hears it on day 2. His response is not a track. His response is a meeting, details of which reach you third hand 4 days after it takes place. A name you recognize, someone with standing on both sides, sat across from Marcus in a location you are not given and listened for 20 minutes. You are not told what was said. You are told only that it happened, which is enough to understand that Marcus's involvement has shifted from reactive to procedural. You made the record because you thought truth was protection. It is not protection. It is a reason. Level 4, street legend. Calvin's funeral draws 200 people to a church on Livonia Avenue on a Thursday morning in November. The cause of death has been reclassified. The investigation is open. It will stay open for 4 years and close without an arrest. You stand at the back. The specific decision to stand at the back of a room where you are the reason it is happening at all is the kind of cost that has no entry in any ledger. Marcus is not present. His absence occupies a square footage in that room that every person can feel and no one mentions. Outside, after the service, a man approaches on the sidewalk. You know his face old enough to carry credibility on both sides. The kind of person who moves between worlds because neither one has fully claimed him. He doesn't extend his hand. He stands at a careful distance and speaks at a volume designed for 2 people. The offer takes 90 seconds to deliver. The terms: pull the record. Issue nothing further that references Marcus or his operation. Acknowledge, through silence, that a boundary was crossed. In exchange, the matter ends. That is the word he uses. You listen without interrupting. Calvin taught you this. Let people finish. The full shape of an offer lies at the end of it, not the beginning. This offer's shape is not complicated. It requires not silence but erasure. The record exists. The stairwell exists. Calvin's 11 years in that building exist. The offer changes none of those facts. It only determines who is permitted to name them. The calculation takes under 30 seconds. You tell him no. 4 words. No explanation, no visible anger. The same register used when declining anything that would require you to become someone you are not, which is the one thing the block taught you, and the one thing the block will eventually make you pay for. He receives the answer without reaction, nods once. Then he says, with the specific flatness of a man delivering the most important sentence in the conversation, Marcus doesn't make threats. He wants you to understand what he's telling you. You understand. That is not the same as having an alternative available. He walks back toward the church. You stand on the sidewalk in the coat you bought 2 days ago because nothing you owned felt appropriate for this. That detail stays with you afterward. Not the eulogies, not the casket, the coat. Marcus doesn't make threats. He makes arrangements. Yours has already started. What you don't know yet is how long he has been making them, and who else has already agreed. Level 5, Underground Artist. You arrive at the studio at noon on a Tuesday with a session booked since Thursday and find the booth already occupied. The engineer doesn't look up when you walk in. He says there was a scheduling error. His voice has the specific flatness of a man delivering a line he was given. You stand in the doorway for a moment. Then you leave. That is the first one. Over the following 12 days, there are 2 more, a Crown Heights venue cancelling a showcase 3 weeks out, a refund check arriving before you've had time to make a call, a DJ who has supported your material at every major event in the borough for 2 years who stops returning messages. Not hostile, not explained, simply unavailable, in the way people go quiet when someone with enough standing has made the cost of being around you clear. Marcus leaves no fingerprints. That is the architecture. Each event is deniable. Scheduling errors happen. Venues cancel. DJs get busy. Nothing connects to anything unless you already know what you're looking at. He is not trying to stop you. Stopping you would require a confrontation, and a confrontation would produce a record of his involvement. What he is doing is more precise than that. He is removing the infrastructure piece by piece, borough by borough, until the radius of what you can do without his permission becomes something he can manage. He doesn't know you map everything. He doesn't know you have been filing each event since the first session that vanished. He doesn't know that the pattern is structurally visible to you, the way a building's load distribution becomes visible to a person who grew up watching which walls hold and which walls are decoration. What he does know is Damon's address. Damon, who has been your road manager since the first tape traveled 3 boroughs. Who was in the room the first Thursday you recorded with Calvin? Who was at the funeral standing 3 people to your left? For 2 weeks you have been watching Damon the way you watch everything calls taken outside in November cold. A hesitation before answering questions about scheduling. The way a person stops meeting your eyes around a name that both of you are thinking about, and neither of you is saying aloud. You don't confront him. You watch. You record what you observe with the same patience developed watching the block from a window at 13 years old. Damon is being pressured, or Damon has already agreed to something. That distinction is the most important piece of information you currently don't have. Marcus knows you don't have it. That is not an accident either. Level 6, Recording Artist. You send the engineer home at midnight. Not because the session is over, because what comes next has to be built alone. The room is borrowed 4 stops past your usual territory, paid through someone who owed someone, no name attached to the booking. The distance measures what it has always measured, the radius of who you trust with your location. That radius has been shrinking for months. The board is running. The booth is empty except for you and a microphone and 18 hours that no one knows about. You put the headphones on. You sit in the chair. You say the thing you're afraid to say. What comes out across those 18 hours is closer to testimony than music, a structured account of what it costs to name true things in a place that needs them to stay quiet. The first track returns to the stairwell, not the accusation this time, but the man, Calvin's voice. Calvin's chair angled toward the door. The 11 years. The second track names what the stairwell means, which is a different and harder thing to say. The third track is the one you have been carrying since the coat that didn't fit, since the 9-word message that ended 4 years of Thursday sessions. You have known what it needs to say since the funeral. You have been waiting for the room to be empty enough to say it. The second track takes 4 hours and 11 takes. Not because the language fails, because on takes 1 through 10, the language works precisely well enough to locate the exact wound, and getting that close requires deciding. On each take, whether to let it show. On take 11, you decide. On take 12, you record it. At hour 16, the producer, the one person trusted enough to be in the building, knocks twice on the glass and holds up his phone. The screen shows Damon's location, timestamped 3 days prior. A building in East New York that you know by its function, not its address. You look at the screen for 4 seconds. You put the headphones back on. You record the third track in 2 takes. The producer runs the final playback alone while you sit outside the glass and watch him the way Calvin used to watch you from the other side. He sits without moving after the last track ends. Then he looks up. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. You walk out at 6 in the morning carrying a finished record and the feeling of a man who has said everything that needed to be said, whether or not the people who need to hear it ever will. The street outside is ordinary. Garbage trucks. Early light on wet pavement. The city at its normal speed, with no knowledge of what was just built inside that building. You don't know yet that Marcus knows exactly which building it was. The city's indifference is not cover. It never was. Level 7 headliner. The call comes on a Wednesday afternoon at a diner on Flatbush while you are doing nothing significant. The number is unfamiliar. You answer because unfamiliar numbers have carried the most important information in your life for the past 8 months. The voice belongs to someone inside Marcus's operation, not the center of it, not the edge. The position that gives a person enough visibility to understand what is coming and enough distance to feel the weight of that. He speaks for 4 minutes without interruption. What he delivers: a location, a timeline, and a name. The name belongs to someone you don't recognize, which means someone you can't map, which means someone whose approach you cannot anticipate by watching for the behavioral changes you've learned to read. This is deliberate. Marcus knows you map everything. He sends someone you have no map for. You sit with the phone on the table and look at the ordinary Wednesday afternoon through the diner window for a moment. Then you make 2 calls. The first is to a lawyer on Atlantic Avenue, used once before for a contract dispute that resolved without proceeding. You tell him you need to put something on file. Not a will. You are 22 years old and you don't use that word. A record. A spoken dated account naming Marcus, naming the stairwell, naming the full timeline from the first track through the last session, through the information on the producer's phone 17 days ago. The lawyer asks no questions about the content. He schedules 9 the following morning. The second call is to a journalist who has been requesting an interview for 4 months. She covers the economics of the music industry and the street infrastructure that funds it, the actual intersection, not the version that gets published for readers who aren't from the neighborhood. You have declined 3 times. You tell her you are available. She asks when. You say next week. You don't explain the timing to either of them. That night you record one more thing, not for release. A spoken account into a cassette recorder, the same format as the first tape. The one that traveled 3 boroughs because it said something true at a volume people felt the obligation to carry. You name every name. You state the date at the beginning and again at the end. You put the cassette in an envelope and write a name on the front. Someone from the building. Someone who was present before any of this started. The show tonight is in Crown Heights, booked 6 weeks ago before the infrastructure began disappearing. It survived the siege. You noted that as unusual and did not resolve why. You get dressed. You get in the car. The route is 40 blocks. Ordinary streets, ordinary traffic, ordinary city moving at its normal speed. The indifference is the last consistent thing. Level 8, the legend. The block outside the venue on New York Avenue is ordinary in every particular late November at 38 degrees, the right number of cars. The specific mixture of bass from inside the building and street noise from the avenue that means nothing is wrong and everything is normal. You exit between sets for air. 2 people with you. 12 feet of sidewalk between the door and the street. Then the ordinary night collects its debt. 3 shots. The geography. A stretch of sidewalk adjacent to a fire hydrant painted over so many times the original color is no longer identifiable. The city will not remember this detail. The people present will not forget it. You don't die on that sidewalk. You die 4 days later at Kings County Hospital, which is 2 miles from the building where you were born, a fact that carries the weight of a city that has never moved far enough to stop mattering. What survives? The record, certified gold 11 days after the shooting, which is 3 weeks faster than any prior certification from that distributor. The spoken account, retrieved by the person whose name was on the envelope, delivered to the journalist on the Thursday following. The lawyer's file, entered into a proceeding that opens 6 months after the sidewalk. The proceeding closes without a verdict. 4 years. No arrest connected to the stairwell. No arrest connected to New York Avenue. Marcus is arrested 7 months after the shooting on a tax charge related to a filing from 1991. He serves 14 months. The charge shares no connection with anything in this story. That is not coincidence. That is how accountability functions at this level, through channels that have nothing to do with the events that made accounting necessary. Calvin understood this. He tried to explain it once. You filed it without believing it would apply to you. The journalist publishes. The record is reissued. The spoken account becomes, in certain circles, what the first record became: a document. The word used in exactly the same way. A structured account of a reality being extracted from without being examined. Right now, somewhere in Brownsville, on the same corner where 30 people formed around a voice at 11 at night in October, the same bodega light running out at the same edge of the same block, there is a kid who is 17. He has your last record in his headphones. He has a notebook. He knows the record. He knows the corner. He doesn't know about the stairwell, the coat that didn't fit, the 9-word message that ended 4 years of Thursday sessions. He doesn't know what it cost to say the true thing in a room that needed it to stay quiet. He doesn't know yet that the math is not the hardest part. He picks up the pen. On this corner, they always do. If this one stayed with you, like and drop a comment where you're watching from. Subscribe for more.